In 1953, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a novel called Childhood's End, in which he predicted, among other things, that the development of easy, reliable contraceptives and accurate paternity tests would completely change traditional sexual practices, make casual sex common, and more or less eliminate marriage as we are used to it. I'm not a big fan of Clarke, but he hit that one dead on. The fact that in modern Western society, sexual restrictions are becoming progressively looser is beyond debate. Clarke gave the impression, way ahead of his time, that this would be a generally positive development. Frankly, I couldn't disagree more. The old argument is that casual sex is a natural consequence of women's liberation. There has long existed a double standard where women sleep around, blah blah blah, sluts versus studs, blah blah blah, consenting adults, blah blah blah. These arguments have gone back and forth for years, and somehow lead to the conclusion that the solution to that double standard is for everyone to have sex with as many people as possible. It's led to a society in which it's not only socially acceptable to have sex without marriage, it's acceptable to have sex without any kind of commitment or real relationship. The culture of hookups, booty calls, friends with benefits, etc. has become the new normal. This is bad for both women and men. The oldest and crudest arguments for sexual restrictions are purely physical. You'll get pregnant or you'll get disease. These are both real consequences, but are much more controllable in the age of condoms, contraceptives, and antibiotics. Sufficient technology may eliminate these consequences altogether. More important is the emotional impact. Turns out, sex has all kinds of consequences to it. Who knew, right? And it turns out the biological purpose of sex is not only to make babies, but to bond couples together emotionally. In other words, sex and love are supposed to be fundamentally and basically intertwined. In our society, we're doing our best to sever that connection. Have sex enough times without any commitment, and eventually you'll completely deaden the feelings that are supposed to develop with that kind of intimacy. When you're young, cool, and cynical, it probably seems empowering to be able to emotionally detach yourself from a sexual encounter, to sleep with someone and never see them again. But that kind of thing has consequences. Every moment of our lives stays with us. We can't treat sex as meaningless one day and then have it be just as meaningful the next. Our sexual practices deeply and fundamentally affect how we see ourselves and how we relate to others. When this is applied to an entire society, the effects magnify themselves greatly. In an excellent article in XX, Mark Regnerus discusses some of the effects of a sexually casual society. Marriage becomes much less common, delayed or ignored altogether. Relationships become less stable, men become less motivated. What's really interesting to me is what this does to relationship dynamics. The idea that sexual liberation really frees women to do what they want to do is utter crap. When it becomes socially common for sex to be casual, without effort or commitment, women are forced to compete with each other sexually for male attention. Now, of course, sexual competition is nothing new, but the rules have changed drastically. The stark and impolitic fact is that men and women approach sex differently. The typical man wants sex for the sake of sex and wants to do as little as possible for it. The typical woman wants sex, but as part of a relationship that involves emotional commitment, romance, support, and fidelity. Despite the tragically hip claims of detachment, this remains true. Giving guys access to completely casual sex is like giving a little kid the keys to the candy store. They'll take all they can get without thought as to whether or not it's bad for them. The thing is, the social effects are self-reinforcing. On a basic level, men want sex, and most things men do are designed to get them sex. Women hear this and think, okay, all men are pigs. But if a man cannot get sex without making an effort, without improving himself, without committing to a woman, without doing things to make her happy, then he will do those things. This changes the man. This is part of a man's development. He has to learn to be a better man because women demand a better man. If, on the other hand, getting sex involves putting down his Xbox controller and KFC bucket long enough to text a woman to come over and service him, he will atrophy, physically and emotionally, both as a boyfriend and as a human being. When this becomes the norm in our society, we end up breeding an entire generation of men with no motivation to improve themselves. And we breed an entire generation of women who think that's how men are, and you can't change them. So you might as well sleep with that guy because it's all you can get. And if you don't, some other girl will. Is there a solution to this? Of course, but it's not easy, and women have to take charge. Men as a gender will not. Sure, some men can rise above this simple effort reward mechanism, but the average man will not improve himself unless he has to. No, such a sea change requires a critical mass of women deciding that they won't degrade themselves by sleeping with someone who doesn't care about them. Each woman needs to decide that sex and love are supposed to be connected. And if someone doesn't really love her, if he doesn't treat her right, if he doesn't commit to her completely, if he isn't willing to make himself better for her, then he doesn't deserve her. Real power for women doesn't lie merely in the elimination of restrictions. It requires creating a social order in which women have rights, they have control and influence, and they don't feel pressured to compete with one another for some pathetic excuse for attention and affection. When a woman expects more from a man, both of them will end up happier.